In today's podcast, we will be discussing with our guest Ibrahim bin Mas'ud about the 2021 Syrian presidential elections, its illegitimacy, why is Assad still in power, and what are the alternatives. Join us on the Levant 24 podcast to hear more. Today in the studio we have a special guest, Ibrahim bin Mas'ud. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
I see you've been active on social media recently.
Yeah, alhamdulillah, it's been going for a while now, yeah.
How did that happen?
Many reasons. Really, I try to take advantage of, much of the good and much what's happening in the arena that needs to be portrayed, needs to be sort of dissected, you could say, and try to put my, basic amount of abilities and ideas regarding these sort of events that are occurring, and try to utilize social media to try to minimize the hardship that the Syrian people are going through, contribute to some sort of solutions for their future.
Well, it's very good to have you on today. For our listeners, Ibrahim bin Mas'ud has been active in the Syrian revolution since the beginning. He's a researcher and currently residing in Idlib, Syria. So, one of the things I wanted to talk to you about today are the Syrian elections.
No.
It's been a bit more than 10 years of war, destruction, and it's been one of the biggest humanitarian crises the world's ever seen.
No.
After all this, Bashar al-Assad's actually got the nerve to nominate himself again for presidency.
Yeah.
So maybe we can kick off the discussion today about the elections and these elections themselves. Are they legitimate? Are they illegitimate? Because every Syrian I've spoken to has just been telling me it's a big joke.
Yeah, subhanAllah. It's definitely a hot topic on the table now. It's become the laughing stock of the Syrian revolution, Syrian people, even inside Assad areas. I noticed the video, one guy was filming Damascus, and there were virtually hundreds of Bashar's pictures all over the roundabouts, all over the streets.
Yeah.
It's just become a big joke.
I saw that literally every 10 meters. The video was about a couple of minutes long.
Yeah.
Every 10 meters, there's a life-size picture of Bashar al-Assad.
Yeah.
It looks like a cult,
Yeah, subhanAllah, man. And you got, obviously, the loyalists trying to take advantage of this election to try to say, oh, yeah, we're still around, we're still here, even after we've killed and destroyed Syria. Yeah, what are you going to do about it, world? Look, we're still here, It's got this sort of gangster, mafia-style stance.
Yeah.
And you got the people in the refugee camps, the millions that are displaced, are sitting there on the sideline, oppressed and watching, unfortunately, with nothing other than their dua, their prayers to God to help them, and the revolution and their sons, hopefully in the future, can try to contribute to some sort of solution. Now, you mentioned legitimacy.
Legitimacy or illegitimacy.
Yeah.
Because it seems to not be very legit.
Yeah, subhanAllah, man. It's a very important point. Really, the actual election itself, it coming on and you could say taking place, it's just a hoax. You've got the history, you've got external attributes, or you could say events that have taken place, internal events that all, if you put them together, just shows how much of a joke really these elections are.
Yeah.
SubhanAllah, if we wanted to speak a little bit about, you could say a little bit about the history of the political process in Syria.
Yeah, go on.
You got the 2254 resolution, the UN resolution, which was in 2015 member. In addition to that, it was supported by the Arab Union, by the European Union, by Turkey, other states. One of the 15-member body was Russia themselves. This resolution was obviously on the highest, you could say political body in the world, which is the United Nations. Even though I've got a lot of issues with the way this whole political process has taken place.
Yeah.
Obviously, it's just been a lot on the paper, nothing really on the ground. And the Syrian people have been, hardship as a result of these political procedures. But the 2254 itself had two clauses which address the elections. The first clause was the Constitutional Committee. And for it to take place and have three main parties which take part, the Assad regime, or the regime, you could say, the civil society, and the opposition, to take place and to draw up a new constitution for Syria.
As far as I knew, they didn't actually write anything up.
Yeah, the constitution, finally, the committee was organised and took off in 2018. The main party which was trying to stop this from actually moving forward was the Assad regime themselves. Any form of step they try to take, a problem would happen. Assad regime would pull out. Problems would take place, like I mentioned. So this committee it was one of the clauses, like I mentioned, for this committee to actually draw up a new constitution before any elections took place. Now, that committee didn't actually come up with any fruits, and this is the UN. All the parties that have taken place have really recognised and acknowledged the failure of this committee. The second clause, which I mentioned, was the supervision of the UN over any elections. Now, obviously, that would be a second step. Committee would come and organise, agree on a new constitution, and then there'd be the UN supervision. Now, both these haven't taken place. The Assad regime has called for a new election. Bashar al-Assad has even put himself forth to be one of the candidates for the election. All this is happening under the whole world watching, and this is actually just proving the illegitimacy, if we wanted to speak on a political level, the illegitimacy of this election.
That's in regards to international dynamics, you could say, in regards to these so-called elections. Also, you've got internal dynamics. I mean, the legitimacy or illegitimacy of these elections inside Syria itself.
No.
You have the regime which is renowned for election fraud, for putting forth basically fake candidates.
Yes.
Basically putting on a show.
Yes. You got the history of the elections, as you mentioned. From 1971 was the first election. The father, Hafez al-Assad, he come forth and election took place. He won that election by and had 99.2% of the votes. You can imagine.
Just to give our listeners a rundown, I think for approximately the past 50 years or so, yeah?
Yeah, over half a century.
Yeah, and as far as I know, it started back in the 60s when Bashar's father, Hafez al-Assad, who was basically part of a military coup,
which
overthrew the government
in
and brought
1970,
the Arab Socialist Party, Ba'ath Party, to power.
Right. Yes,
and then not long after that, he participated in a second coup, and this coup toppled the leadership of the Ba'ath Party.
Yeah.
And then a few years after that, a third coup, basically putting himself as the leader of Syria.
That's right. Now they came in that you could say in that matter, in that way, and the cycle of failure or the cycle of humiliation, hoax, play, lies, corruption. It started from then, and it's been on a procedure. 7 years after 7 years, these elections are taking place. 100%. One of the elections in 1985, 3 years after the death and the murder of up to 50,000 Syrian people who uprised against the Assad regime, Hafez al-Assad's regime then. 3 years after that, the father, Hafez al-Assad, got 100% of the votes.
Wow. I do not think that's unheard of. That is unheard of.
It's just crazy, Akhi. Really, common sense. Look at these figures with common sense. This shows the failure, the corruption, the hoax. You know what I mean? It just shows what the Syrian people have had to face for decades and decades, Akhi.
You know what's funny on that point? I saw a video the other day. It showed a pro-Assad supporter. She was voting in one of these booths.
Yeah.
And she was shoving like 5-6 ballot papers in the box. She didn't know she was being recorded, you know?
Yeah.
So she was quickly trying to shove like 4 or 5 ballot papers in the same box.
Yeah. So that's election fraud. It's carried on with the son even. When the son took over after the father died, they edited and amended the constitution so that his age was able to take over the leadership, take over control. And then at that first year that he took over, 99.7% of the votes he got. Then 2007, 99.3%. And then 2014. This is in the war.
Yeah.
Half of Syria have been displaced. Up to, by 2014, 400,000 have been killed. Tens of thousands in the prisons, and he's still got 88.7%.
Yeah, that doesn't comprehend with me. You know, you have more than Syria's pre-war population displaced.
Yeah,
hundreds of thousands killed. Many, their whereabouts and their well-being's not even known.
Yeah.
Yet he's managed to get these numbers. You know?
That's right. Look, at the end of the day, the Syrian people have made their stance very clear. They say to Assad that you can fool your loyalists and your little boys that are around you. You can't fool the Syrian people. And that's what this revolution's been all about, really. Yeah,
I couldn't agree with you more. Look, let's put all that to the side for argument's sake. Let's say, for example, that these elections are UN-regulated elections. Every Syrian actually had a chance to vote, and there was actually a legit procedure in place to facilitate these votes. Morally, I mean, this is someone who has killed his own people in the most brutal way. You know, from chemical weapons to barrel bombs, all the killing, destruction, displacement, all this just so he can remain in power.
Yeah. Yeah, look, at the end of the day, Akhi, like you mentioned, up to 1 million have been killed. There's still tens of thousands in these prisons and tens of thousands missing. The families don't know where they are. You've got half of the Syrian population have been displaced. The corruption, systematic corruption, where you can't get anything achieved without paying bribes, and actually, anyone that comes up and tries to show some sort of objection or opposition to the Assad regime either gets killed or gets exiled or goes missing in the dungeons. You got the thousands upon thousands that are orphans and widows. Look, even proposing that all these procedures would be legitimately would take place in a legitimate fashion, even that proposal itself just doesn't make sense.
Even as a president, economically, the country's in ruins. Their currency's collapsed. They can't even supply the civilians with basic necessities.
Yeah, but they can supply their printers with photos for Bashar al-Assad in the streets, which would cost hundreds and thousands of dollars.
Crazy.
So if they transfer that to getting food and bread for the poor and needy.
Well, I guess maybe we can speak about this now, is why is Assad still in power? After all these dynamics, all these events, why is he still in power?
Yeah, subhanAllah, I think maybe analysing this on a external and internal dynamics, trying to break it up, really the revolution had Assad on his knees in 2015. In September 2015, the Russians came into Syria declaring World War III.
Yeah.
And this is Putin himself stated it.
Yeah.
And you had the Iranians, really they were on the back foot. Hezbollah had come in with tens of thousands of militias. They had been, getting smashed left, right and centre, you could say. You had the Assad regime lost vast land, especially in western Idlib and Hama and in the Ghab plains. So Assad regime was just about to fall apart. And you had the revolution at a high pinnacle, you could say, morally and ability to expand. That's when you had the Russian intervention. Bang, coming with this full power, air power, knowing that the revolutionaries didn't have anti-aircraft equipment. And the Russians took advantage of that and coming with full force, and just burnt the ground, left no building, etc. in his way, just destroyed everything, obviously destroying civilian areas, houses, government buildings, hospitals, schools, just destroying everything, and trying to use that fear factor, strike fear into the hearts of the poor Syrian people for them to run and leave no option and cause problems and sort of havoc in the ranks of the revolution. You had also as well the Iranian, like I said, the Iranian nuclear agreement with the United States, which released for them hundreds of millions, even tens of billions of dollars, which gave them ability to send tens of thousands of soldiers on the ground to fight on the ground with the Russians in the sky, to bring Assad back from death. And this really was what, my opinion, was the turning point, which Assad to stay alive till today. Otherwise, he wouldn't be here. Syria would be in the hands of the revolution. Things would be totally different. There would be no Assad in Syria.
As well as Russian and Iranian military intervention, Russia also intervened on a political level.
Yes, definitely. They gave full
especially
strength.
with vetoing. I don't know how many times Russia and China have used the veto.
16 vetoes. Russia vetoed on behalf of the Syrian regime 16 times. And China vetoed 10 times. Now, these vetoes were for a number of different reasons. Of them, the International War Tribunal, so that Assad can be held accountable for killing hundreds of thousands and using chemical weapons.
So basically the whole world's trying to bring Assad to justice, bring him in front of an international criminal court.
Yes.
And Russia and China,
they're standing in the road. This actually shows a big flaw in the way this United Nations Security Council system actually works.
Yeah, that's crazy.
That you got this criminal killing and destroying, and even he's got more war crimes on him than Hitler. He's killed and destroyed Syria, and we haven't seen anything like this maybe in modern history.
Yeah.
And we're still standing there watching him doing elections, Akhi.
Wow. And it's amazing that we're in the age of social media and technology. Literally nothing happens where it's not recorded, it's not spread across the world.
It's all open.
And this revolution, they even call it like the revolution of social media.
Yeah.
Because social media is what brought, or you could say, ignited
Yeah.
and helped spread the message of the Arab Spring,
Sahih.
the protests in Syria.
Sahih.
And so nothing, at least with Hitler, okay, there was like media blackouts. It was a bit hard to get all the information. Now everything is available on everyone's phone around the world.
Yeah, so he's also used another thing to his advantage with regards to the external dynamics, you could say. Trying to portray himself to be the solution to try to protect the interests of regional and international powers. So you have, for example, Israel. Israel's they're a neighbor of Syria.
Yeah.
So Israel's definitely got interests in Syria, security interests, economic interests. So you got the Assad regime trying to portray that on one you could say podium, we're the Muqawmi, we're the ones that will protect and free Palestine from the Israeli occupation, etc. And on the other, behind the scenes, under the table, he is protecting the borders of Israel, and will cut the hand off anyone that tries to aggress or try to shoot or bomb or etc. Israel. So he's proving himself on paper, is proving himself on the ground that he is actually protecting Israel's interests in Syria.
You know, it's funny because that's one of the main rhetorics that Assad and his regime use to keep his supporters loyal to him.
That's right.
Is that he's a protector of them against Israel and all this talk.
No.
Yet weekly they're getting bombarded by the
that's
Israelis.
right. Yeah.
And even the recent events in Gaza.
Yeah.
And our condolences, and our hearts are with the people of Gaza and Palestine and what they're going through. After that whole ordeal, Syria didn't even lift a finger.
Yeah, that's right, Akhi. That's not of their policy. It's been from 1971, Akhi.
Yeah.
The father was in place 1973. He basically gave up the Golan Heights. And then things just went from then till today absolutely cold as ice.
Yeah.
There's no conflict. He's protecting the borders even in southern Lebanon. You have Hezbollah being the Muqawmi, coming here killing the Syrian people. Why don't you put those same bullets, Akhi, towards Israel?
Yeah,
What are you killing the poor Syrian children for, man? So you're supposed to be the one who, I'm Israel, we're going to fight Israel, all this sort of rhetoric, as you mentioned. At the end of the day, Akhi, those bullets, they were fundraising and stealing and corruption, stealing the money of the Syrian people and the Lebanese people's money, they were apparently taking that to protect Lebanon and Syria from Israel and to fight Israel in the future. Akhi, they used all that to kill and destroy the Syrian people, Akhi. Easy as that. Yeah. Easy as that.
And you mentioned these external dynamics, even internally, to add on the point that you were saying, the concept of fear. Suppressing his people, keeping them in a constant state of fear.
That's right.
Where they feel like they need Assad to protect them. And he uses this tactic with the minorities. Even his father used it.
That's right.
And, there's many Druze, Christian, and other minorities in Syria that they believe that Assad is the only person that can protect them.
Yeah, obviously this is just one of the biggest lies he's been able to try to work on. And people have coming up to understand, Akhi. It's been, like I said, after this decade of destruction, not to mention before the Syrian revolution, what they done to the Syrian people. The Syrian people are aware, Akhi. There are definitely elements or aspects, or you could say some sort of dynamics that will cause the Syrian people that are still in his areas, which only maybe 1/3 of the Syrian population, Akhi. Let's put that in perspective. So who's actually going to vote here in this election?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? There's only a very small percentage of the Syrian people that are actually going to take part in the election, Akhi.
Yeah, I think it's around 6 or 7 million, something like this. Yeah, and it's just a small,
you have
small amount.
Approximately 1/3 of the Syrian population, initial 23 million, 1/3 of the population in Assad's areas.
Yeah.
Who's actually going to take part in the election? So who's left in Assad's areas? They've seen the one that opposes Assad, what will happen to them. Death, destruction, prisons, exile. That's what they see in Akhi. So you got to they'll think 100 times, 1,000 times, 1,000,000 times before they oppose him, Akhi. And adding to that, you have Assad putting his relatives in sensitive positions. You have Rami Makhlouf. He was they said up to 60% of the Syrian economy and workforce was under his control, Akhi.
Yeah.
And he's Assad's first cousin.
But even then, recently, or not, only about a few months ago, he released some videos on social media showing that a lot of discontent.
Yes, that's right.
He had with the leadership and with Assad himself.
Yeah, that's known, Akhi. When interests conflict between these corrupt leaders, it's bound to come up for the rest of the world to see. You have as well the loyalist base who have been stealing, robbing, the corrupt, have killed, have imprisoned for tens of years, particularly in the war, They know that if Assad goes, he's the barrier between them and accountability. Assad leaves, hundreds and even thousands of his loyalists are going to face accountability, akhi.
Yeah.
So this accountability is what will keep them, like you mentioned, fear. That'll keep them grabbing on to Assad and holding on to him with all they got, because that means life or death for them. And these Syrian orphans are going to be the ones that are going to work for the rest of their life to make sure these people are held accountable. So they're trying to keep Assad in power to protect them, to protect their interests, to protect and to save them from accountability from all they've done in the past decade.
Yeah, you mentioned before about suppression.
No.
And historically, Assad, even his father, renowned for suppressing any opposition that would come forth and try and uprise or compete against him, rather. And the most notorious example being the suppression of the Muslim Brotherhood, the uprising in Hama, which was in 1982, I think.
Yeah, that's right. No, you had that was a big message to the Syrian people that if you're going to oppose me, I'll wipe you off the face of the earth, and I'll kill you. I'm bloodthirsty. It's basically a message saying, I'm bloodthirsty. I'm a criminal. Whenever you oppose me, I'll just kill you, or I'll exile you, I'll chuck you in prison, and I'll lock the door. I don't care. So he's shown the people, I'm a dictator, I'm a tyrant, I'm an oppressor. You want to mess with me, that's what you're going to face. So easy as that.
Basically, Harvard's taught his son well.
Yes.
Yeah.
You have also, Akhi, there are many political figures that are around the world that have been exiled before the revolution and after the revolution. They are prominent figures. They are doctors, they are intellectuals, academics. They have all the ability, akhi, to lead Syria, with all the ability to lead Syria to a just, prosperous future. But they are not able to come back to Syria.
Yeah.
They've been exiled. Even the tens and hundreds that have been killed, who were the most prominent figures in the region, who were capable of leading Syria to a prosperous, righteous, just future. So Assad has done all he can to eliminate them off the face of the earth, akhi. And this has left another reason, this has played into him staying in power till today.
I guess we can't really talk about all the problems without also addressing the alternatives.
No.
Are there any alternatives to Assad?
Yeah, akhi, for the one to say, subhanAllah, I read a tweet. They said that the message, I found it was very strong. He said, if yous are saying that there is no alternative to Assad, if you mean by that there's no alternative to Assad to protect the interests of Israel, protect the interests of the oppressors in the region, to protect the interests of Russia and Iran in Syria, and if we can't find an alternative to be as corrupt as him and to kill as many people as him and to imprison as many people as him, I think you've got a point there.
I don't think you'll find an alternative. In the last 100
years.
He's
been the best candidate to be the worst leader on the face of the earth. So if that's what they mean by there's no alternative, then yeah, fair enough. But if we mean an alternative to lead the Syrian people to a just, prosperous future, to live a righteous life, to be free, to live and establish and develop for them and their children a future which any human being deserves on the face of the earth, then yes, there are thousands upon thousands of alternatives within the revolution's ranks, in and outside of Syria. You have many prominent people that are classed as the opposition. They might not be with any particular group or any particular faction or any particular political body, but they are figures who have stood by the Syrian people, worked for the Syrian people, not for external powers at the price and at the cost of the Syrian people, like Assad and his regime. They've been there, stood by the people, the Syrian people, and working day and night to protect them and to try to bring for them justice, accountability for their enemies and the ones that oppress them, and try to bring for them a prosperous future where they can live a just, honourable life.
You know, I get asked that a lot by many people. Are the revolutionists an alternative to Assad? And of course, the revolutionists are not without their faults.
Yeah.
And in my opinion, the biggest being disunity.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
But in your opinion, how would you answer that question?
Yeah, akhi, the revolution itself. Subhanallah, it's a revolution to take the Syrian people from oppression and from the dungeons of Assad regime and from, you could say, dictatorship, tyranny, to take them out of that into justice, into freedom, and to live an honourable a life of dignity as
Sure,
they
sure.
deserve. So that's what the revolution's like. That's the logo.
Yeah, yeah.
That's the motto
Yeah.
of the revolution.
Yeah.
So now, just us proposing that motto itself shows that the revolution is the alternative.
Yeah.
Because that's, if you ask any sane, clean-hearted human being, this logo or this motto of the revolution, it just makes sense. Now, if we come back on the ground, how things are being implemented, what's the issues that have occurred on the ground? I'll say, yaqinan, 100%, there have been many problems that have occurred, and for many different reasons. Of them is in their hands, revolution's hands. Of them is out of their hands, akhi. Like I said, the Russian intervention, coming in with power, coming in with destruction, no mercy, burning, carpet burning, like burning cities and towns. How can you face that, akhi? You got basic abilities, basic weapons. You don't have anti-aircraft. You're facing an enemy that doesn't know Allah, doesn't know God, doesn't know humanity, or
has no
he's got
shame.
no
Has no
boundary.
shame, has no
He's
honor.
broken
Yeah.
all rules and regulations of war.
Yeah.
This is what the revolution's faced,
Yeah.
and obviously it's going to cause problems. It's easy as that.
I think on a moral side, I don't think anyone will disagree with you. Bilax, millions of Syrians would agree with you. But also on the ground, there has to be certain mechanisms, certain institutions, certain establishments
Yeah,
in place
yeah.
that can support and facilitate the livelihood of the Syrian people.
I agree. I think, look, what's happened, because the revolution's been so full on, they've been on the back foot. They've been busy with their internal conflict.
Yeah.
And really the bigger picture sometimes might have been like taken away from them. And I think it needs a small step back.
Yeah.
Let's look at the greater picture. What unites us? What brings us together? That's what we've got to work on, akhi. And bring our hearts together and unify for the sake of for the sake of this cause, this righteous and noble cause, for the sake of the future of the Syrian people, what will actually serve them and bring good for them. In addition to that, them being busy in this internal sort of on the ground, dealing with these like tens of thousands, millions even of refugees, just dealing with these sort of problems, it really pulls you away from the greater picture. So delivering your message to the world, really, I think it's fallen short. Like you mentioned the Palestinian cause.
Yeah.
MashaAllah, may Allah be with our Palestinian brothers and sisters in Gaza and Al-Aqsa. They stood in front of the enemies, the Israelis, like lions, akhi. May Allah reward them, give them the highest levels of Jannah. They're in our dua. And our cause is similar to their cause, akhi. It's oppressed people that are oppressed, facing a tyrant oppressor.
Yeah, some people say Idlib is another Gaza.
That's right.
It's basically besieged.
That's
It's
right.
facing a brutal tyrant, and it's just crazy.
Yeah, that's right. So the message, like the Palestinian message you mentioned, like their message is being delivered clearly to the world. So you have such a huge advocacy for the Palestinian cause, which I believe the Syrian cause is missing.
Yeah.
We need to establish diplomatic relations with the world. We need to build our ties with the world,
100%.
deliver our message, a clear message, and to clarify the misconceptions. There are many misconceptions the world's got towards Idlib, towards the Syrian revolution, towards northern Aleppo. There are many misconceptions that need to be clarified. It's not the way the world thinks it, akhi. I know there's been problems, like I mentioned, many different reasons. Even the whole terrorism banner, which has been thrown over Idlib or thrown over northern Syria.
Yeah.
That's going to be revised.
Yeah.
Because it's harming the cause, it's harming the people. Sometimes the Muslims themselves fall into this trap, akhi.
Yeah.
Calling Idlib terrorism. What's wrong, man? What's wrong with you, akhi? We're facing a tyrant who's destroyed and killed our brothers and sisters, children, carelessly. You know what I mean? Indiscriminately. Yet you have Muslims around the world supporting him or defending him or saying, it's just an internal conflict, civil. What are you talking about, civil war? No, it's far full on than that. It's far more full on than that.
It's definitely not a civil war.
Yeah, that's right.
It's a revolution.
Exactly. Okay.
Out of oppression.
Exactly.
Into a prosperous
Exactly.
future. And I think any alternative that is to counter or to replace Assad and whatever fallen institutions he has, they genuinely have to serve the interests of the Syrian people. I think this is the key point. And Syria is a diverse country. And it's clear that Assad's priorities and his interests is the regional powers' interests.
That's right.
Whether it's Iran, Russia, or Israel.
No.
But I think, in my opinion at least, the revolutionists, if they really want to be an alternative for the Syrian people.
No.
They have to genuinely serve the interests of the Syrian people.
Barakallahu fik, akhi. Look, I think you hit the nail on the head with that. Wallahu alam, akhi. Look, everyone's protecting themselves. The Israelis are protecting themselves. Iraqis are protecting themselves. Lebanese, Americans, Iranians, Russia. Everyone's trying to seek their own interest. No one is seeking the Syrian people's interest, akhi. Now, if the revolution, that's their role, akhi.
Yeah,
and that's
yeah.
what they're trying to seek. So, yeah, Assad themselves, they failed miserably at serving the Syrian people. This is where the revolution's role is, and that's where they'll fill in the big void. And they have been partially. There's definitely much more for them to fill in the future. And inshallah, when they do that in a genuine way, coming down on the ground, this is why I think Idlib may be different to other parts of Syria where the leaders, the people, the government, they're trying to work on trying to integrate with the civilians themselves.
Yeah.
You have over 1 million people in the refugee camps living in miserable conditions. They need to be served and addressed.
Yeah.
They need to be transferred into houses, into projects that can protect them from the cold and the heat in summer and winter, and try to bring forth for them some economic solutions and jobs. I'll say that that's being established. The diplomatic side with the external powers, international powers, it's being established on behalf of the revolution. It definitely needs much more in the future.
Yeah. You mentioned refugees, and I think roughly 2/3 of Idlib are refugees.
Yeah, you
Correct me
have.
if I'm
Yeah,
wrong.
that's right. No, yeah.
And I think there can be no real solution unless these refugees, their homes are liberated,
No.
and the areas that they've been forcefully displaced from
Yeah.
are freed from occupation,
That's
and they're
right.
able to return to their homes.
That's
This
right.
should be the stage one, basically.
Yeah, that's right. That's where you have even in the Syrian regime's areas right now. They've been doing polls. Even now, they caught ships on the borders of Cyprus. So you're having people that want to leave Assad's areas. They don't want to come back.
Yeah, yeah.
No one wants to live in Assad's areas.
Just the other week, or the other month, rather, there was a group of Alawite students.
That's right.
They fled the regime areas. They came here
To the liberated areas.
just so they can study and live a normal
That's
life.
exactly right, Akhi. So you got people that are fleeing Assad's areas, not going back. Now, if we want to look at it from that perspective, on the international community's level, regional level, and the Muslim world's level, for the Syrian people to come back to Syria, Assad has to be gone. And the revolution, I'll say, is the card that isn't burnt. They've got the ability to bring the people back. Now, inshallah, when they liberate areas, this will open opportunities for Syrians around the world to come back to Syria and live a prosperous, righteous life of dignity, honor, the way they deserve.
I couldn't agree with you more, brother. And on that final note, I'd like to say thank you very much. Jazakallah khair for coming in today. I really appreciate your time.
Wa iyyakum, Akhi. Thanks for having me on, and may God bless you, Akhi.
Ameen, you too.